My dad picked his gold-digging girlfriend over our own family, so we finally threw him out to the curb. A year later, he was completely broke, and she ditched him the exact moment she learned. He came crawling back to us immediately. But it wasn't to be a family again. The man who taught me how to ride a bike, who was once my hero, looked me dead in the eye and told my sobbing mother she wasn't good enough anymore. All for a woman he'd known for 2 weeks. Outside, the sprawling new house glittered under the sunset, a monument to Robert's sudden success. Inside, however, a different kind of darkness was settling, cold and silent, a prelude to the storm that would tear our family apart. It felt like we'd won the lottery overnight. One day, my siblings and I were sharing cereal because milk was a luxury, and the next, we were in a house so big I could get lost in it. Hot water flowed endlessly, and I finally stopped getting picked on at school for my threadbare clothes. For a brief, dazzling moment, I thought we were living a dream. My father, Robert, had built a successful business from nothing, and we were finally reaping the rewards. But the new life came with a sinister undertone. Robert, always a simple man, became obsessed with his image. Designer suits for breakfast, fancy cars, attending glittering events almost every night. I was only 12, too young to understand the slow erosion taking place, until I walked into the kitchen one evening and found my mother, Sarah, hunched over the counter, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Through her tears, she choked out that Robert had canceled their anniversary dinner, a sacred tradition, for a client meeting. Even my young mind knew that was a betrayal. It was a cold, cruel sign that something fundamental had shifted. The real knife twist came a few weeks later. Robert announced he was leaving Sarah to marry Tiffany. Tiffany, the woman he'd met at that very same client meeting he'd ditched my mother for. She was young, stunning, and carried herself with an air that demanded attention. It all happened so fast, like a scene ripped from a bad movie. I remember the rage bubbling up inside me. I confronted him, my voice cracking with preteen fury. Mom was there for you when you had nothing. Tiffany just came along 2 weeks ago. You can't just leave her for some shiny Barbie doll. But he just stared at me, his eyes cold, as if I were a stranger. Then he turned to Sarah, who stood by, already defeated, and said, "A man of my status needs someone who takes care of herself the way Tiffany does." The words hung in the air, a venomous, casual cruelty. I watched, helpless, as Sarah silently packed her bags, tears streaming down her face, but not a single sound escaped her lips. That image still haunts me. Tiffany moved in within days. Our grand, new house immediately felt claustrophobic. Life became a performance. Robert and Tiffany would jet off on lavish vacations, leaving me, my sister Chloe, and my brother Owen, for weeks with nannies we barely knew. When they were home, their presence felt colder than their absence. They'd spend their days horseback riding, wine tasting, indulging in all the luxuries we used to dream of as a family. We'd beg to join, and Robert, in rare moments of warmth, would seem open to it. But Tiffany always found a reason to exclude us. It was chillingly clear she saw us as inconveniences, burdens. Robert, blinded by her, always did what she said. One night, Tiffany cornered me. Her voice was low, laced with venom. "Stop stealing his money. It's for me, not you." She was talking about my school fees, Owen's soccer, Chloe's art supplies, the necessities. I was stunned. I tried to talk to Robert the next day to explain, but he just scoffed, accusing me of hating Tiffany because she'd replaced Sarah. That was the moment I knew. He was gone. The father I knew, the one who loved us, was gone. The inevitable arrived with predictable cruelty. Robert and Tiffany's lavish lifestyle was a bottomless pit. The money, which once seemed infinite, began to dwindle. Their private jets grounded, replaced by commercial flights. Lavish resorts downgraded to budget hotels. Daily gourmet dinners became takeout pizza nights. Tiffany, predictably, did not handle the shift gracefully. She openly mocked Robert at dinner, calling him cheap, scoffing at the low-quality jewelry he now bought. Robert, a shadow of his former self, would shrink, stammering apologies like a wounded dog, desperate to appease her. Then came the cuts that truly broke my heart. Robert pulled us from our private schools, canceled Chloe's gymnastics, Owen's music lessons. Also, he could fund Tiffany's dwindling demands. I heard Chloe crying herself to sleep, her dreams of Olympic glory shattered. Owen, always chatty, retreated into a shell, his voice barely a whisper. When I confronted Robert, begged him to see what he was doing, he barely reacted. His focus, his entire being, was consumed by Tiffany. One evening, at another silent dinner, Robert dropped the final, devastating bomb. He'd taken money out of our college funds. Not a loan, not an investment. He'd taken it. Because Tiffany needed a vacation to de-stress. That was it. The line was not just crossed, it was obliterated. There was no longer anything for us there. The next day, we were back on Sarah's doorstep. She opened her arms and enveloped us in a hug that felt like coming home. Her house was small, cluttered, and worn, but it radiated a warmth that our grand, empty mansion never had. Our days became simple again. Homework at the kitchen table, laughter echoing during dinner, the mundane comfort of just being. Sarah never spoke a bad word about Robert, but sometimes, when she thought we weren't looking, a flash of profound sadness would cross her face. A year drifted by, quiet and healing. We didn't hear much from Robert, and, honestly, we weren't sure we wanted to. Then, one cold evening, a stranger stood on our porch. Unshaven. Gaunt, his clothes rumpled and cheap, his eyes hollowed by exhaustion. It was Robert, but he looked like he'd aged a decade. Sarah hesitated, her hand trembling on the doorknob, then stepped aside. He sat on the edge of our worn sofa, staring at his hands as if they held the answers to all his failures. Slowly, painfully, he confessed. His business had crashed, bankrupt. The money was gone. And the second he had nothing left, Tiffany had left him. She hadn't even offered a word of comfort, he whispered, just started packing the moment he told her. It was heartbreaking to watch him, this shell of the man who once towered over us. By the end, he was red-faced, embarrassed, crying openly. He begged for a second chance. Not just from us, but from Sarah too. He wanted to be a family again. Sarah just sat there, quiet for a long, agonizing time. Chloe, now 15, cried silently beside her. Owen, 10, stared intently at the floor, oblivious to the storm. I was 17, a turbulent mix of emotions warring inside me. Part of me wanted to scream at him to get out, to vanish back into the gilded cage he'd chosen. But another part, a small, fragile part, remembered the dad who pushed me on the swings, the one who patiently taught me to tie my shoes, before the money had poisoned everything. Finally, Sarah spoke. Her voice was flat, measured. You can stay on the couch for a few nights, Robert. While you figure things out. Not a reconciliation, not forgiveness. Just basic human decency. Robert looked relieved, but also a little disappointed. I think he'd expected open arms, a tearful reunion. That night was excruciating. Robert tried making small talk during dinner, asking about school. We gave short, clipped answers. Sarah kept things civil, but the air between them was thick with unspoken history. After dinner, I helped Sarah with dishes while Robert tried to connect with Chloe and Owen in the living room. From the clatter of plates, I could tell it wasn't going well. Later, I overheard Sarah and Robert talking in the kitchen. He was apologizing again, repeating how stupid he'd been. Sarah wasn't having it. Actions have consequences, Robert. You can't just waltz back in here expecting everything to be fine. I silently cheered her on. The next morning, I woke early for school and found Robert already awake, standing over the stove. Pancakes. My favorite from when I was little. I could see the effort, the yearning for normalcy, but it felt manipulative, somehow. Like he thought a plate of pancakes could erase years of abandonment. I grabbed a granola bar and left early. At school, my mind replayed the endless awkwardness. My friend Alex noticed. During lunch, I spilled everything. Alex, whose parents had been happily married forever, thought I should give Robert a chance. He just didn't understand. When I got home that afternoon, Robert was fixing the leaky faucet in the bathroom. Sarah was at work. Chloe and Owen weren't home yet. It was just us. He tried to make conversation, asking about my college plans. I gave short answers, grabbing a snack from the kitchen. Then he dropped a bomb. He'd been thinking about how to make things right. He'd found some of Tiffany's expensive jewelry she'd left behind. He planned to sell it and put the money toward our college funds. I just stared. Part of me was impressed he was trying, genuinely trying. The other part wondered, with a sickening lurch, if Tiffany would come after him when she found out. I just nodded and went in my room. That night, Robert announced his plan to everyone. Sarah looked concerned. "Is that even legal, Robert?" she asked, her voice tinged with unease. Robert insisted Tiffany had abandoned the items. Chloe seemed hopeful, but Sarah wasn't convinced. After dinner, she pulled Robert aside. "I couldn't help myself," I eavesdropped. Sarah was telling him he couldn't solve problems by creating new ones. If Tiffany came after him for the jewelry, it would only make things worse. Robert got defensive, his voice rising, insisting he was just trying to make amends. Their voices grew louder until Sarah hissed, "Lower your voice. The kids can hear you." Saturday arrived, heavy with unspoken tension. Robert suggested we go to the park, like we used to. Sarah said she had errands, but told us kids we could go. Owen, surprisingly, was excited. Chloe said she had homework. I reluctantly agreed, mostly to keep an eye on Owen. At the park, Robert tried way too hard, pushing Owen on the swings with exaggerated effort, asking about my friends, buying us ice cream. It was like watching someone follow a How to Dad instruction manual. I kept my responses minimal, but Owen, with his innocent heart, was clearly warming up. Then Robert's phone rang. His face, already strained, went white when he saw the caller ID. He stepped away, but I could hear fragments, yelling about her stuff. "Calm down, talk about it." It was Tiffany. When he came back, he looked terrified, but tried to act normal. On the way home, Robert got another call. This time, the name Marcus Delgado flashed across his screen. Robert's voice was suddenly subservient, nervous. He explained he just needed more time to pay something back. When he hung up, I asked who Marcus was. Robert brushed it off as just business, but his eyes darted away, betraying the lie. When we got home, Sarah was waiting, a strange expression on her face. She pulled me aside while Robert distracted Owen with video games. "A woman showed up looking for Robert," she whispered, her voice tight. Tall, blonde, and furious. Tiffany. Sarah had told her Robert wasn't living here, just visiting. Tiffany hadn't believed her and threatened to come back. That night, I couldn't sleep. Robert's phone calls, Tiffany's visit, Sarah's crumpled note. Something wasn't adding up. Around midnight, I heard the front door creak open and close. I peered out my window and saw Robert hurrying down the street to meet someone in a parked car. They talked for 10 minutes before he returned, looking even more stressed. The next morning, Robert announced he had a job interview. Sarah looked surprised, but offered supportive words. As soon as he left, Sarah confided her worry. She'd found a crumpled note in the trash, what looked like gambling debts. Marcus Delgado's name was at the top. I decided to do some digging. While Sarah was at the grocery store, I found Robert's duffel bag. Inside, a pawn shop receipt for a diamond bracelet, a pittance compared to its value. Then, on his phone, a threatening text from Marcus, "Time to collect what's owed." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Robert wasn't just broke because Tiffany spent his money. He had gambling debts. He was using us, using Sarah's home, as a safe haven while he desperately tried to pay them off. The family reunion was a cover. When Robert got back from his interview, I confronted him in the kitchen. "Who is Marcus? And what's with the gambling?" His face went white. He tried to deny it, then got angry that I'd gone through his things. Finally, he broke. He admitted everything. His business had started struggling, so he'd turned to gambling, trying to win big, to save it all. He'd lost everything, borrowed from dangerous people, and now they were after him. Tiffany hadn't left just because the money ran out. These guys had started showing up at their house. He'd come to us not for reconciliation, but because he needed a place to hide. The desperation in his eyes, the hollow shame, made my stomach churn. I was beyond furious. The betrayal felt like a physical blow. I stormed out, slamming my bedroom door so hard the framed family photo from before he left fell off the wall, the glass cracking across Robert's smiling face. My hands shook as I texted Chloe, "Come to my room. ASAP." She appeared a minute later, hair still wet from her shower, concern etched across her face. I told her everything, the words tumbling out in a rush of anger and fear. Her face fell, eyes widening when I mentioned Marcus Delgado. We both knew we had to tell Sarah, even though I dreaded adding more weight to her already burdened shoulders. Sarah got home from her diner shift an hour later, the familiar jingle of her keys, the sigh as she kicked off her sensible black shoes. We pulled her into her bedroom and spilled the truth. She sat on the edge of her bed, the mattress sagging, her face getting paler by the second. When we finished, she just stared at the floor, absently rubbing the calluses on her hands, calluses she'd earned working double shifts after Robert left us. "I need to talk to your father," she finally said. Her voice was calm, but ice cold. I'd never heard that tone before. It sent shivers down my spine. We followed her to the living room where Robert was watching TV with Owen. A cartoon played, Owen giggling, oblivious to the storm about to break. Sarah sent Owen to his room. He looked confused, but complied, glancing back at us with curious eyes. As soon as he was gone, Sarah unleashed. She didn't yell. That would have been easier to handle. Instead, she spoke in a deadly quiet voice, asking Robert how he could bring this danger to her home, to her children. Each word was precisely chosen, delivered with surgical precision. Robert tried to defend himself, stammering that these guys weren't actually dangerous, just persistent. The way his eyes darted around the room betrayed his own disbelief in what he was saying. Sarah wasn't buying it. She told him he had 24 hours to figure something out, or she was calling the police. Robert begged her not to, insisting it would only make things worse, that these weren't the kind of people who responded well to law enforcement. The desperation in his voice made me realize how deep he truly was in. That night was the most awkward dinner ever. The only sounds were forks scraping against plates and Owen's occasional attempts at conversation, which died quickly in the frigid atmosphere. Liam kept looking around, confused, his eyes lingering on Robert's untouched meatloaf. After dinner, I helped Sarah with dishes while Robert sat on the couch, staring at his phone. I could see the panic in his bouncing leg, the frantic tapping of his fingers. Later, I overheard him in the bathroom, trying to keep his voice down. The thin walls of our house made his whispered pleas perfectly audible. He was talking to someone named Mark, begging for a loan. "I know I said that last time, but this is different," he insisted, his voice cracking. "These guys don't mess around, Mark." From what I could make out, Mark wasn't interested in helping. Robert sounded desperate, offering collateral he didn't have, promising returns he couldn't guarantee. When he emerged, his eyes were red-rimmed, and he avoided my gaze as we passed in the hallway. The next morning, Robert was gone before anyone else woke up. The house felt eerily quiet without his nervous energy filling the spaces. He left a note, meeting with an old business contact who might be able to help. The handwriting was shaky, some words crossed out and rewritten. Sarah just shook her head when she read it, her lips pressed into a thin line of disbelief. She called in sick to work and spent the morning making calls to a lawyer friend for advice, pacing the kitchen with a cup of coffee that grew cold in her hands. Around noon, the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the tense silence like a knife. Sarah looked through the peephole, and her whole body tensed, knuckles whitening as she gripped the doorframe. "Go to your rooms," she told us, her voice leaving no room for argument. I pretended to go, but doubled back and hid around the corner, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. Sarah opened the door just a crack, the chain still on, her body positioned to block any view into our home. It was Tiffany. Even from my hiding spot, she looked different, less polished, more frantic. Her designer clothes were rumpled, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She demanded to know where Robert was, saying he'd taken things that belonged to her. Sarah calmly said he wasn't there, just visiting occasionally, and tried to close the door. But Tiffany jammed her foot in, the pointed toe of her expensive boot preventing the door from shutting. He pawned my tennis bracelet. Tiffany hissed, her voice carrying the raspy edge of someone who'd been crying, or yelling, or both. That was worth 20 grand, and he got what, 3 for it? I want the rest of my stuff before he sells that too. Her manicured nails gripped the edge of the door, red polish chipped and uneven. Sarah tried again to close the door. Tiffany pushed harder, her desperation matching Robert's in a way that made me realize they were both drowning in the same mess. Those people he owes money to? They think I'm involved. They followed me yesterday. Do you understand what kind of people these are? Fear made her voice crack, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. That's when I stepped out. I couldn't help myself. The need to know exactly what danger we were in overpowered my promise to stay hidden. I asked Tiffany exactly who these people were. Sarah shot me a look that mixed anger with pure terror, but Tiffany actually answered, perhaps relieved to have someone else acknowledge the gravity of the situation. Your dad got involved with Dante Rossi. He runs an underground poker game downtown, out of the back room of that Italian restaurant on 4th Street. Your brilliant father thought he could win big. Instead, he lost everything and borrowed more. Dante doesn't do payment plans. She laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and frightening. He does broken fingers and slashed tires as reminders. Sarah finally managed to close the door, but not before Tiffany shouted that she'd be back with the police if her stuff wasn't returned. Sarah leaned against the door, looking completely drained, the lines around her eyes deeper than I'd ever noticed before. Pack an overnight bag, she told me, her voice steady, despite the fear I could see in her eyes. We're staying at Aunt Brenda's tonight. She didn't need to explain why. The threat in Tiffany's voice had made it clear our home might not be safe anymore. I texted Chloe, who was at a friend's house, telling her to meet us at Aunt Brenda's. Sarah called Owen in from the backyard, where he'd been building a fort with lawn chairs, blissfully unaware. Within an hour, we were in the car, heading across town, the trunk loaded with hastily packed bags. Sarah left Robert a note telling him where we'd be and why, her handwriting much steadier than his had been. Aunt Brenda was Sarah's older sister, living in a small apartment on the other side of town, in a building with a security door and cameras, features that suddenly seemed vital. She welcomed us with open arms, though her eyebrows knitted with concern when Sarah explained the situation, her glances flicking to us kids. That night, we all crammed into her tiny living room. Owen and I on the pull-out couch that squeaked with every movement, Chloe on an air mattress that slowly deflated, and Sarah sharing Aunt Brenda's room. The unfamiliar shadows on the ceiling kept me awake, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Around midnight, Sarah's phone rang, the sound jarring in the quiet apartment. It was Robert. I pretended to be asleep, but listened to Sarah's side of the conversation, her whispered words carrying clearly. Robert was panicking because we weren't home. Sarah told him we were safe, and that he needed to fix his mess without putting us in danger. No, I'm not telling you where we are right now, she said firmly. Not until I know it's safe. When she hung up, I heard her crying softly, muffled sobs that she was trying to hide from us. It was the first time I'd heard her cry since Robert had left us 3 years ago. The next morning, Sarah sat us all down. We'd be staying with Aunt Brenda for a few days until Robert sorted things out. Owen started crying, asking if the bad men were going to hurt Robert. His small face crumpled in fear, reminding me how young he still was. Too young to understand the complexity of this nightmare. Sarah hugged him, saying Robert would be fine, but I could tell she wasn't sure. The way she avoided Chloe's eyes told me everything I needed to know about how serious this was. Later that day, Robert showed up at Aunt Brenda's. I was surprised he'd found us, but Sarah later explained she'd texted him our location after he called, sounding desperate and afraid. He looked terrible, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, wearing the same clothes as yesterday. Aunt Brenda reluctantly let him in, but stood with her arms crossed, her protective stance making it clear she blamed him for putting her sister and nieces and nephew in this position. Robert told us he had a plan. He'd reached out to his old business partner, Greg, who had agreed to loan him enough to pay off Dante. Greg had always been the sensible one, cautioning against expansion before they were ready. Robert should have listened to him then. Sarah asked how he planned to pay Greg back, her tone skeptical. Robert said he'd gotten a job at Greg's new company. It wasn't glamorous, basically starting over at the bottom, but it was legitimate work with a steady paycheck. Sarah seemed skeptical, but a tiny bit relieved, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. Just as things were calming down, Robert's phone rang. The generic ringtone seemed to echo in the suddenly silent room. His face fell when he saw who it was, color draining away once again. He stepped into the hallway to answer, but we could all hear him anyway. The walls in Aunt Brenda's apartment were even thinner than ours. It was Dante. And he wasn't happy. Robert kept saying he'd have the money tomorrow, just one more day. His voice took on a pleading quality that made me cringe. When he came back in, he looked like he might throw up, his hands visibly trembling as he shoved the phone back into his pocket. "They know I'm here," he said quietly, his eyes darting to the window, checking the parking lot below. "I need to go." That's when I lost it. Years of bottled-up resentment exploded out of me. "You're putting all of us in danger because of your stupid mistakes." My voice rose with each word, cracking with emotion. I reminded him how he'd abandoned us for Tiffany, leaving us struggling while he played house with his new girlfriend. And now he was dragging us into his gambling mess. Sarah tried to calm me down, placing a restraining hand on my arm, but years of hurt came pouring out. I told Robert the first wished he'd never come back into our lives. The words hung in the air, impossible to take back. The look on his face was gut-wrenching, a mixture of shame and pain that made me immediately regret my outburst. But I was too angry to apologize, too hurt to take it back. He nodded slowly, apologized to everyone, and left. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Sarah followed him into the hallway. I couldn't hear what they said, but when she came back, her eyes were red and she wouldn't look at me directly. That night, I couldn't sleep. The pull-out couch felt even more uncomfortable, every spring digging into my back. I kept thinking about Robert out there somewhere, possibly in danger. Despite everything, he was still my dad, the one who taught me to ride a bike, who came to every school play before he left us. Around 2 a.m., I checked my phone and saw a text from him. "I'm sorry for everything. I love you kids more than you'll ever know." The timestamp showed it had come in an hour earlier. It read like a goodbye note. I panicked. I woke Sarah up, showing her the text. She immediately tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. She called again and again with the same result, her movements becoming more frantic with each failed attempt. Finally, she called the police to report him as potentially suicidal. They took the information, but didn't seem particularly concerned. "Adults go off-grid all the time," the officer said, his voice bored. "Especially when they're having financial troubles." The next morning, we still hadn't heard from Robert. Sarah was beside herself, pacing Aunt Brenda's small living room, calling everyone she could think of. She called Greg, whose number she found in Robert's old contacts. Greg hadn't seen or heard from Robert since yesterday afternoon. He confirmed the job offer and the loan, but Robert needed to come sign paperwork today. "Tell him to call me," Greg said. "The offer still stands." Sarah decided to go look for Robert. Aunt Brenda stayed with his kids while Sarah drove around, checking places he might go. His old office building, the park where he used to take us, even driving past Tiffany's house. She came back hours later, exhausted and worried. No sign of him anywhere. She'd even checked the hospital, afraid he might have done something desperate. Around dinner time, there was a knock at the door. The sound made us all freeze. Aunt Brenda checked the peephole and quickly stepped back, her face pale. It was Dante. And he had another guy with him, bigger and meaner looking, with a tattoo creeping up his neck. Aunt Brenda told us to go to the bedroom while she called the police. We huddled together on her bed, Owen clinging to Chloe, while I pressed my ear against the door. From the bedroom, we could hear Dante shouting through the door that he just wanted to talk, that Robert owed him money. "I know he's staying here," he yelled, his voice muffled but clearly angry. "This doesn't have to get complicated." The police arrived surprisingly quickly, their sirens audible from blocks away. We heard them talking to Dante, telling him to leave or be arrested for harassment. Dante and his friend eventually left, but not before shouting that this wasn't over. The threat lingered in the air long after they were gone. The police officers came in to take a statement. Sarah explained the situation, including that Robert was missing. They seemed more concerned now, taking down all the details and promising to keep an eye out. One officer, a woman with kind eyes, gave Sarah her direct number. "Call me if he contacts you," she said. "Or if those men come back." That night was tense. We all jumped at every sound. Car doors slamming, voices in the hallway, the building's heating system kicking on with a clink. Sarah barely slept, constantly checking her phone. I caught her looking at old family photos, tears silently tracking down her face. The next morning, she got a call from the police. They'd found Robert's car abandoned in a parking lot near the river. My heart dropped. We all feared the worst. Images of him jumping into the cold, dark water flashed through my mind. Sarah left immediately, her hands shaking so badly she dropped her keys twice. Aunt Brenda tried to distract us, but it was useless. We were all thinking the same thing. What if he'd done something terrible to himself? What if my last words to him had pushed him over the edge? The guilt was suffocating. Hours later, Sarah returned, looking both relieved and furious. Robert was alive. The police had found him sleeping in a cheap motel across town. His phone battery dead, charger left behind in his haste to leave Aunt Brenda's. He'd turned off his phone before it died, afraid Dante would track him. When the police told him how worried we all were, he broke down crying, begging them to tell us he was okay. Robert came back to Aunt Brenda's with Sarah. He looked awful, like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were rumpled, and he desperately needed a shower, but he was alive. He apologized over and over for scaring us. Then he told us his new plan. Greg had come through with the loan. Robert had the money to pay off Dante. He was going to meet him tonight at a public place to make the exchange. As he explained, his hands kept fidgeting with his wallet, pulling it out and putting it back, a nervous habit I remembered from childhood. Sarah immediately shot this down. She told Robert he needed to go through proper channels, get a lawyer involved, or have the police present. Robert insisted this was the only way. Guys like Dante didn't do lawyers or paper trails. They operated in cash and threats. After a long argument, during which Aunt Brenda took Owen out for ice cream to spare him the tension, they compromised. Robert would meet Dante, but in a very public place, the food court at the mall. And Sarah would be nearby, watching, ready to call the police at the first sign of trouble. I insisted on coming too. The thought of staying behind, not knowing what was happening, was unbearable. After some back and forth, they agreed I could come, but had to stay far away with Aunt Brenda while Sarah watched from a closer distance. Chloe and Owen would stay at Aunt Brenda's apartment with her neighbor keeping an eye on them. Chloe protested, wanting to come, but Sarah was firm. "One child in potential danger is already too many," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. That evening, we put the plan into action. The mall was busy with after-work shoppers, providing the crowd Robert had hoped for. He sat at a table in the food court, a cup of untouched coffee in front of him, while Sarah watched from a table about 30 feet away, pretending to be absorbed in her phone. Aunt Brenda and I positioned ourselves near the entrance, pretending to shop, but keeping an eye on everything. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Dante showed up right on time, alone, thankfully. He looked more normal than I expected. He could have been any businessman in his crisp shirt and slacks. He sat down across from Robert. From our position, I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see Robert sliding an envelope across the table. Dante counted the contents, nodded, and stood up. It seemed like it was over. The nightmare finally ending. I felt myself starting to breathe again. Then Tiffany appeared. Out of nowhere, like she'd been waiting and watching, too. She must have followed Robert from Aunt Brenda's apartment, knowing he'd be meeting Dante. She marched right up to their table and started yelling at Robert. I couldn't hear the words, but her face was red with anger, her hands gesturing wildly. Dante looked annoyed at the scene she was causing, glancing around as people started to stare. Robert tried to calm her down, his hands raised in a placating gesture, but she wasn't having it. She kept pointing at the envelope Dante was now tucking into his jacket. Mall security started heading their way, a heavy-set man in a uniform moving with surprising speed. Dante quickly left, disappearing into the crowd before security arrived. Robert and Tiffany were still arguing when the security guard reached them. I watched as Robert tried to explain, but Tiffany was making a huge scene, drawing attention from everyone. A small crowd had gathered, some people openly filming with their phones. Sarah rushed over to intervene. I couldn't help myself. I followed, ignoring Aunt Brenda calling after me. By the time I reached them, Sarah was trying to get between Robert and Tiffany. Tiffany was demanding her jewelry back, screaming that Robert had stolen it. You took everything from me, she shouted, mascara running down her cheeks. My jewelry, my savings, my reputation. The security guard asked them all to leave. As we walked toward the exit, Tiffany kept following, getting louder and more aggressive with each step. In the parking lot, she grabbed Robert's arm, spinning him around with surprising strength. That's when she noticed the empty envelope sticking out of his pocket, the one that had held the money for Dante. The streetlights illuminated her face as realization dawned. You had money this whole time, she shrieked. You told me you were broke. You owe me. Her voice echoed across the nearly empty parking lot. She lunged for the envelope. Robert tried to stop her, and they struggled, their movements jerky and desperate. Sarah tried to separate them, pulling at Tiffany's arm. In the chaos, Tiffany lost her balance and fell, hitting her head on the pavement with a sickening crack. She wasn't moving, a small pool of blood forming beneath her blonde hair. Everything happened so fast after that. Sarah called 911 while Robert checked on Tiffany. She was conscious but dazed, blinking up at the night sky in confusion. Paramedics arrived and took her to the hospital, carefully stabilizing her neck before moving her. The police came too and took statements from everyone. They seemed satisfied it was an accident, but told Robert they might need to speak with him again. One officer eyed him suspiciously throughout the questioning, making notes that seemed longer than necessary. We all went back to Aunt Brenda's, shaken by the whole experience. Robert was a mess, convinced he was going to be arrested for assault or something. He kept replaying the moment, insisting he never meant for her to fall. Sarah assured him the security cameras would show it was an accident. There are cameras all over that parking lot, she said, rubbing his back like she used to do when I had nightmares as a child. They'll see what really happened. The next day, Robert got a call from the hospital. Tiffany was fine, just a mild concussion and a few stitches. She'd told the police she didn't want to press charges. Robert was relieved, but suspicious. It wasn't like Tiffany to let something go, especially when she could use it to her advantage. He paced Aunt Brenda's living room, waiting for the other shoe to drop. We found out why later that day when Tiffany showed up at Aunt Brenda's. She had a bandage on her head and a smug look on her face. She'd somehow gotten our location, probably by following us from the hospital. She told Robert she wouldn't press charges or tell Dante about the incident on one condition. Robert had to sign over his car to her. It was the last valuable thing he owned, a BMW he'd kept even as everything else was sold off or repossessed. Robert was cornered and he knew it. He agreed to her terms, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Sarah was furious, saying Tiffany was blackmailing him, but Robert just wanted it all to be over. He signed the transfer papers Tiffany had already prepared, the pen shaking slightly in his hand, and she left with his car keys, looking triumphant. Through the window, we watched her slide into the driver's seat of Robert's car, adjust the mirrors, and drive away with a screech of tires. That night, Robert sat us all down for a family meeting. He admitted he'd made terrible mistakes, choosing Tiffany over our family, gambling away his business, and then dragging us into his mess. His voice broke as he apologized, years of poor decisions finally catching up to him. He promised to do better to earn back our trust. He was starting his new job at Greg's company next week, and he'd be paying Sarah back for all the child support he'd missed. I know words are cheap, he said, looking each of us in the eye, but I'm going to show you with actions from now on. Sarah wasn't ready to forgive him completely, but she agreed to let him stay on our couch until he found his own place. It was a start. A small olive branch extended after years of hurt. Owen was thrilled, immediately asking if Robert could take him to the park tomorrow. Chloe was more reserved, but I saw her smile slightly when Robert offered to help with her homework. The next few weeks were awkward, but gradually improved. Robert went to work every day at his new job, leaving early and coming home late. He came home tired, but seemed satisfied to be doing honest work again. He gave Sarah most of his first paycheck for back child support, keeping only enough for a bus pass and lunches. He spent time with Owen playing video games, helped Chloe with her science project, and even asked about my college applications, small, tentative steps toward rebuilding what he'd broken. One evening, about a month after the mall incident, Robert and I were alone in the kitchen. He was washing dishes while I finished homework at the table. The familiar domestic scene almost made it feel like he'd never left. Out of nowhere, he told me he was proud of me for standing up to him when he came back, for protecting the family. He said I was stronger than he ever was. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. I didn't know what to say. Part of me was still angry, the hurt too deep to be erased by a few weeks of good behavior. But another part recognized he was really trying, putting in the work every day to make amends. I finally asked the question that had been bothering me for years. Why wasn't our family enough for him? Why did he need Tiffany and all that flashy stuff? The question had burned inside me since the day he walked out. Robert dried his hands and sat down across from me. The kitchen light highlighted the new gray in his hair, the lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He explained that growing up poor had left him with a hole he thought money would fill. When the business took off, he got caught up in proving he wasn't that poor kid anymore. Tiffany had seemed like the perfect accessory to his new life. Beautiful, sophisticated, everything his insecurities told him he should want. The fancy car, the expensive restaurants, the designer clothes. All of it was armor against his own feelings of inadequacy. But it was all empty, he said, his eyes fixed on the table between us. None of it made me happy. I was just too stubborn to admit I'd made a mistake. He looked up at me then, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Leaving you kids was the worst thing I've ever done. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it if you'll let me. It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was honest. For the first time in years, I felt like I was talking to my real dad, not the fake version who'd abandoned us, or the desperate man who'd shown up on our doorstep a month ago. The next day, Robert got a call from Dante. My heart stopped when Robert mentioned who it was, but the call wasn't what we expected. Dante wanted to offer Robert a legitimate job at his new restaurant. Apparently, Dante had been impressed by Robert's determination to pay his debt, and he needed a manager he could trust. "You're the kind of guy who keeps his word," Dante had said, according to Robert. "That's rare these days." Robert turned it down politely, saying he was committed to his job with Greg. When he hung up, he looked relieved, like he'd passed some kind of test. He told us he was done taking shortcuts. The slow, honest path was the only way forward. Sarah looked skeptical, but nodded approvingly. That night, as we all sat around the dinner table, I looked at my family. Sarah, tired from work, but smiling as she passed the potatoes. Chloe talking animatedly about her school play. Owen actually eating vegetables without complaint. And Robert, humbled but present, listening intently to Chloe's story. It wasn't perfect. There was still hurt and trust to rebuild. Robert would need to prove himself day after day, and there would be setbacks along the way. But for the first time in years, it felt like we might actually be okay. Not the same as before. That was impossible. But maybe something new and eventually something good. 2 months passed quickly after that. Robert kept his word about the job with Greg. He was working his ass off, sometimes doing 12-hour days just to prove himself. Every Friday, he'd hand Sarah an envelope with money for child support and bills. At first, she tried refusing it, saying he should save for his own place, but he insisted. "I owe you guys way more than this," he'd say, and leave it on the kitchen counter. The couch situation wasn't ideal for anyone. Robert's back was killing him, and our living room always smelled faintly of his aftershave. Sarah started looking at 2-bedroom apartments nearby that might be more affordable than our current place. "The kids could share," she'd say, not directly mentioning where Robert would fit in this plan. One Saturday morning, I came downstairs to find Robert making pancakes again. This time, I actually ate them. They were pretty good, even if the edges were a little burnt. We sat at the kitchen table together while everyone else was still sleeping. "I found an apartment," he said between bites. "It's not far from here, just a studio, but it's clean." I nodded, feeling weirdly disappointed. Part of me had gotten used to having him around again. I was thinking, maybe you kids could come over sometimes if you want. No pressure. He was trying to sound casual, but I could tell it mattered to him. "Yeah, maybe," I said, suddenly super interested in the syrup patterns on my plate. Robert moved out the following weekend. Owen cried a little, which made Robert get all misty-eyed too. Chloe pretended not to care, but I caught her giving him a quick hug when she thought no one was looking. Sarah helped him load his few belongings into Greg's truck. They talked quietly by the front door for a long time before he left. Robert's apartment was exactly as depressing as I'd expected. One room with a kitchenette, a bathroom smaller than our closet at home, and a mattress on the floor. He'd hung up a few family photos and had a sad-looking plant by the window, but he seemed proud of it when we visited, like it represented his fresh start or something. The first real test came when Chloe's birthday rolled around in April. Robert asked if he could come to her party. Sarah left it up to Chloe, who shrugged and said, "Whatever, it's fine." Not exactly enthusiastic, but Robert was thrilled. He showed up with a wrapped gift and a cake from the fancy bakery Chloe loved. The cake must have cost him at least half a day's wages. The party was awkward at first. Sarah's friends kept giving Robert these looks, like they were waiting for him to screw up. Aunt Brenda barely spoke to him. But Robert just kept his head down, helped set up games, and stayed out of the way. By the end of the night, things had loosened up a bit. I even saw Sarah laugh at something Robert said while they were cleaning up. Chloe's gift from Robert was a set of expensive art supplies. She'd been into painting lately, covering her side of our shared room with watercolor landscapes. The look on her face when she opened it, surprise followed by genuine happiness, was the first time I'd seen her drop her guard around Robert since he came back. "How did you know?" she asked, running her fingers over the brushes. "I pay attention," Robert said simply. After that, Chloe started texting Robert about her art projects. Small steps. Summer came, and with it, my graduation. I'd managed to get a partial scholarship to state, which was a huge relief. College had seemed impossible when Robert first left and Sarah was struggling to keep us fed. Now it was actually happening. Robert insisted on buying my cap and gown, even though Sarah had already budgeted for it. "Let me do this," he told her. "Please." The graduation ceremony was hot and boring like they always are. But looking out from the stage and seeing my whole family there, Sarah, Chloe, Owen, Robert, Aunt Brenda, even Greg, who'd become kind of a friend to all of us, made all those late nights studying worth it. Robert took us all out for dinner afterward. Nothing fancy, just the local diner, but he paid for everyone. I noticed he only ordered coffee for himself. Later, I overheard Greg telling him to eat something, that he couldn't keep skipping meals to save money. Robert just shrugged it off. That night, Robert gave me an envelope. Inside was $500 in cash. "It's not much for college," he said, looking embarrassed. "But it's a start. I'm going to send more every month." I knew how hard he'd worked for that money, how many hours he'd put in at the warehouse, lifting boxes, taking inventory for barely above minimum wage. It meant more than if he'd handed me a credit card back in his Tiffany days. "Thanks, Dad," I said. And I actually meant it. The real surprise came a week later. Sarah sat us all down in the living room, looking nervous. Robert was there, too, which was weird since it wasn't his usual visit day. "Your father and I have been talking," she started, glancing at Robert. "We've decided to try dating again." Chloe's jaw literally dropped. Owen started bouncing on the couch like he'd just been told we were going to Disneyland. I just sat there, not sure how to feel. "We're taking it very slow," Robert added quickly. "One step at a time, like super slow," Sarah emphasized. "We're not making any promises." But I could see something in the way they looked at each other. Something that had been missing for years, even before Robert left us for Tiffany. Their first date was painfully awkward. Robert showed up with flowers, wearing a tie that didn't quite match his shirt. Sarah spent 2 hours getting ready, changing outfits 5 times. They went to a movie and dinner, the most basic date possible. When Sarah came home, her cheeks were flushed, and she couldn't stop smiling. "It was nice," was all she would say when Chloe pressed for details. They kept dating through the summer, once a week, usually on Fridays. Sometimes they'd bring Owen along, making it more of a family thing. Robert started coming over for dinner more often, staying to help with dishes and homework. He and Sarah would talk in the kitchen long after we'd gone to bed, their voices a low, comforting murmur through the walls. In August, just before I left for college, we had a family meeting. Robert announced he'd been promoted at work. He was now managing the warehouse inventory, which came with better hours and a decent raise. Sarah revealed she'd been taking online classes to become a medical billing specialist, which would mean a better job once she finished. "We've been thinking," Sarah said, looking at Robert for confirmation. "What if we got a bigger place? Something with enough room for everyone?" Owen asked, his eyes wide with hope. "Including Dad?" "Including Dad," Sarah confirmed. "If that's okay with all of you." Chloe looked at me, waiting for my reaction. As the oldest, they were all following my lead. I thought about everything that had happened. Robert leaving us for Tiffany, the years of struggling, his return when he had nowhere else to go, the gambling debts, the Dante situation, and then the slow, steady months of him proving himself day after day. "Yeah," I finally said. "That's okay with me." The relief on Robert's face was almost painful to see. We found a 4-bedroom house for rent not far from our current place. It wasn't fancy. The kitchen needed updating, and the backyard was basically a patch of dirt, but it had enough space for all of us. Robert and Sarah would have the master bedroom. Chloe and Owen would each get their own rooms for the first time ever, and I'd have a room for when I came home from college on breaks. Moving day was chaos. Greg brought his truck again, and Aunt Brenda helped pack boxes. Even Dante showed up for an hour, bringing pizza for everyone and helping Robert move heavy furniture. Seeing them chat like normal people was surreal after everything that had happened. As I was carrying boxes to my new room, I overheard Robert talking to Sarah in the kitchen. They didn't know I was there. "I don't deserve this second chance," he said quietly. "I know that." "No, you don't," Sarah agreed, her voice gentle but honest. "But you've earned it." I slipped away before they noticed me, feeling like I'd witnessed something private and profound. That night, our first in the new house, we ordered Chinese food and ate it picnic style on the living room floor, since we hadn't set up the dining table yet. Owen was excitedly planning how he'd decorate his room, and Chloe was already sketching ideas for a mural on her wall that Sarah had surprisingly agreed to. Robert kept looking around at all of us like he couldn't believe his luck. The doorbell rang around 8 p.m. Robert went to answer it, then called for Sarah. Their voices were hushed, but I could tell something was up. I peeked into the hallway and saw Tiffany standing in our doorway. My stomach dropped. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, her clothes less flashy. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "I just wanted to drop this off," she was saying, handing Robert an envelope. "It's what I got for the car." I know it doesn't make up for everything, but Robert looked stunned. "You sold the BMW?" Tiffany nodded. "I'm moving to Portland. Fresh start." She glanced past him and saw me watching. For a second, our eyes met, and I saw something like regret there. Then she turned and walked away. Robert closed the door slowly, staring at the envelope in his hands. "What was that about?" Sarah asked. "I think," Robert said slowly, "that was an apology." He opened the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for way more than the car was worth, along with a short note. Robert read it silently, then passed it to Sarah. She read it, her eyebrows rising in surprise. "Well," she said finally, "people can change." Robert put the check in his wallet. "This is going straight into the kids' college funds," he said firmly, "where it should have been all along." Later that night, I helped Robert assemble my bed frame. We worked mostly in silence, the instructions spread out on the floor between us. It reminded me of when I was little, and we'd build Lego sets together on rainy days. "You know," I said, tightening a bolt. I never thought we'd be here like this. Robert paused, screwdriver in hand. Me neither, he admitted. I thought I'd lost you guys forever. And I would have deserved it. I shrugged, suddenly uncomfortable with this serious turn. Yeah, well, you're not completely terrible now, I guess. He laughed, the tension breaking. High praise from a teenager. I'm 18 now, I reminded him. Technically an adult. God help us all, he joked. But his eyes were serious when he added, I'm really proud of you. You know, all of you, but especially you. You held this family together when I couldn't. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just handed him another screw. The next morning, I woke up early to finish packing for college. My room was still mostly in boxes, but my bed was made, and Robert had hung up my high school graduation picture on the wall. Through the window, I could see him in the backyard with Owen, marking out space for a garden Sarah wanted to plant. Chloe came in without knocking, as usual. Mom's making pancakes, she said, sitting on my bed. Dad's showing Owen how to build a raised garden bed. Cool, I said, folding a t-shirt. Are you okay? She asked suddenly. With all of this. Mom and Dad. The new house. Everything. I thought about it for a minute. Yeah, I said finally. I think I am. Me, too, she admitted. It's weird, but good weird. We went downstairs together. The kitchen smelled like coffee and pancakes, and Sarah was humming as she flipped them on the griddle. Robert and Owen came in from outside, dirt on their hands and matching grins on their faces. As we all sat down to eat, I realized this was what normal felt like. Not perfect, not a fairy tale ending, but solid and real. Robert caught my eye across the table and smiled. A real smile that reached his eyes. I smiled back. Yeah, we were going to be okay. What about you? If you were in my shoes, would you have been able to forgive your father after everything he did? And do you think Sarah's decision to give him another chance was the right one? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.